Hello everybody, this is Mr. Cloud, and this is the video version of the core content notes for Lesson 6A, Part 2, Separation of Powers. In Lesson 6A, Part 1, we focused on one of the three branches of government that we've been exploring, which was the legislative branch. In this lesson, we're going to look at the other two branches, the executive branch and also later the judicial branch. Alright, so first the executive branch. It's described in Article 2 of the Constitution. It's the second one the founders described for us. This branch, the executive branch, executes the laws. It's right there in the name. Executes executive. Just kind of two versions of the same idea. The word execute has several meanings. You probably thought of the meaning that means to take someone's life. No, that's not what we're talking about. In this sense, execute means that this branch of government makes sure that the laws are actually enforced. To execute sometimes means to make sure things are done, right? So that's what the executive branch does. This branch is headed by the President of the United States, the chief executive officer of the nation. He or she is in charge of making sure that the laws are actually followed and done. He or she can't do this alone. There are lots of folks out there who he or she oversees, who helps execute the laws. For example, the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Agriculture, NASA, National Park Service, the FEMA, Army, Navy, Marines, IRS, U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Department of Energy are just a few of the many federal agencies that are part of the executive branch. The president is the ultimate boss of all those agencies. So the president is ultimately in charge of the CIA, NASA, and all those other things. Sometimes people refer to all those agencies underneath the president as the federal bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is just a big collection of organizations that do stuff, and federal refers to the federal government. So if you put all this together, the FBI, the CIA, FEMA, the Department of Agriculture, all that, some people call that the federal bureaucracy. The president's team prepares the annual budget. We learned a little bit about the annual budget in the last video. This document details how he or she would like to spend the government's money. Remember, Congress approves the president's proposed budget. So Congress and the president have to work together before they can finalize a budget for how we're going to spend our money as a nation. The president also signs bills into laws or vetoes the one he or she does not agree with. We learned about that previously. We'll learn about that some more in a few lessons from now. And the president appoints the following people. And remember, when the president appoints someone, the Senate can confirm or deny these appointments. The president appoints cabinet officers. That's the first one. Cabinet officers are people who are the boss of each federal agency. So the person in charge of FEMA and the CIA, those are all members of the cabinet. Those cabinet officers also directly advise the president on important matters. So occasionally the president will call his cabinet together, and that's the heads of all his agencies, and they'll talk about a particular bill or a particular thing or whatever. The president also appoints ambassadors. Ambassadors are the official American representatives to foreign countries. They typically live in the foreign countries and manage the relationship with the foreign countries. So you could be the ambassador to Japan. You would live in Japan and you would work with the Japanese government to ensure a smooth relationship between America and Japan. We have ambassadors for most other nations, and most other nations have ambassadors who live here in America appointed by their governments. So the president appoints them, but again, the Senate confirms or denies them. The president also appoints federal judges, people who sit on the bench and try federal cases. And speaking of judges, let's now turn our attention down to the judicial branch. So that was the executive branch. They execute the laws, headed by the president. The judicial branch, the third branch of government, is described in Article 3 of the Constitution. The judicial branch is made up of the federal courts. They primarily try legal cases that involve federal laws. So, there's a judge, sometimes there's a jury, there's, witnesses, the whole thing you're thinking of in trials. That's what the judicial branch does, but only for federal laws. There are separate, oops, fix that. There are separate state judicial systems for each state government to try cases involving their own laws. So Virginia has its own separate state judicial department. Here we're just talking about the judicial branch of the federal government. The federal courts focus on federal laws. And the second bullet you need to know about this is the most powerful of these courts is called the U.S. Supreme Court. Very powerful. We'll talk about it quite a bit in class. The highest court in the land. The U.S. Supreme Court has the special power of judicial review. This means that it can declare laws and actions of the presidents to be unconstitutional. If something is unconstitutional, that means the U.S. Constitution does not allow it, therefore it has to stop. So the judicial branch, particularly the Supreme Court, is plenty powerful because of this power of judicial review. All right, make sure you do your online learning check. Thank you for watching. See you in class.